He found out I cheated and never said a word. Then I saw him 8 months later, and it broke me. I didn't lose him in a fight. I didn't lose him to distance or time or growing apart. I lost him in complete silence, and somehow that was so much worse than anything he could have ever said to me. That silence is what I want to talk about today, because I think people underestimate how much it costs you when someone who used to choose you every single day simply decides, with no argument and no farewell, that you are no longer worth a single word. Marcus never raised his voice. He never sent a long paragraph about everything I did wrong. He never gave me the dramatic ending I probably deserved. He just picked up a bag, looked at me one time, and walked out of my life like he had rehearsed it, like some part of him had already been saying goodbye for longer than I knew. And I have spent the better part of a year trying to breathe through the weight of that. Marcus and I met 4 years before everything collapsed. We moved in together after 2 years, built a real life, the kind that accumulates quietly, a dog named Theo, inside jokes, a Sunday morning routine that felt sacred. He was the kind of man who noticed things. Not just big things, but the small ones, when I was tired before I said it, when something at work was eating at me even though I was smiling. He had this way of just seeing me that I took for granted for longer than I want to admit. And while he was busy seeing me, I was somewhere else entirely, making decisions that would eventually take a sledgehammer to everything we built. His name was Darius, and he worked in a different department at my job, and I want to be honest with you right now, because I think you deserve that honesty. I knew what I was doing. Every step of it. I felt unseen in my relationship. I felt like Marcus was pouring everything into his business and leaving nothing for me. And instead of saying that out loud, instead of sitting down with the man who loved me and telling him I was drowning, I turned toward someone who made me feel like the most interesting woman in the room. It started with texting, then drinks, then 6 weeks of choices I cannot take back. I am not going to dress it up or make it sound like something happened to me, because it didn't. I happened to it. And eventually, the truth caught up with me the way it always does. I wasn't even home when Marcus found out. Darius had sent me a voice note, something careless and flirty, and my phone was sitting on the kitchen counter screen up when the notification previewed. Marcus saw it. He called me while I was in a parking deck across town, and I remember exactly where I was standing when I heard his voice come through the phone, because something in the flatness of it stopped me cold. He didn't accuse me. He didn't ask me anything painful right then. He just said, in this unbearably calm tone, "When you get home, I need you to be honest with me about something." And those 12 words unraveled me completely before I even pulled out of the parking deck, because it wasn't what he said, it was what wasn't in his voice. There was no heat, no panic, just this terrifying stillness that told me he already knew, and that he had already started the process of deciding what came next. The drive home took 20 minutes and felt like a lifetime. When I walked through the door, he was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him and Theo in his lap. That detail broke something in me the moment I saw it, because Marcus was always saying he didn't want the dog on the furniture, always gently putting Theo down, but right then he was just holding him. One hand resting on the dog's back like he needed something warm and honest to anchor him. He didn't say anything when I sat down. He just looked at me. And something about that look, not angry, not broken, just clear, the clearest I had ever seen his eyes, made me tell him everything without a single hesitation. The whole timeline. How it started. How far it went. I didn't minimize a single piece of it, because the way he was looking at me made dishonesty feel like a physical impossibility. He sat through all of it without interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, one slow nod, like something had been confirmed rather than revealed. Like he had asked the universe a question and the universe had just answered. He stood up, put Theo down carefully, and walked to the bedroom. And I sat at that table alone, listening to the sound of drawers opening and closing, hangers shifting, the zipper on a bag, and I understood in real time that I was hearing the sound of my life being packed away. He came out carrying a single gym duffel. Not a suitcase, not boxes, just one bag, which told me this wasn't a dramatic exit for effect, it was just the beginning of a quiet and methodical departure. He picked up his keys from the hook by the door, his wallet from the counter, his phone charger from the outlet near the couch. He moved through our apartment with this heartbreaking efficiency, like a man who had already mentally checked out and was simply finishing the physical part. And then he stopped. He turned and looked at me one time, just one, and that look contained everything he chose not to say. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something further away than both of those things, something that looked like finality. Then he opened the door, and he walked out, and I heard the latch click behind him, and the apartment went so quiet it felt like the walls had absorbed all the air. I told myself he needed a night. Then two. I waited for the call where he would scream at me, the long message where he would list every grievance, the confrontation I had prepared myself for because I believed, genuinely believed, that anger was still a form of connection. What I did not prepare for was nothing. His red receipts were on, and I watched every message I sent sit on delivered for days. Then eventually, silently, he blocked me. Not all at once, which somehow would have been easier. He did it the way you clean out a closet, one thing at a time, thoroughly and without rush. Instagram first, then iMessage, then every other place he could reach across and remove me from his view. About 2 weeks after he left, I came home from work to find his things gone. No note, no phone call to arrange a time, nothing. He had come with someone, cleared out everything that was his, and left the furniture because the furniture would have required a conversation, and he had decided there would be no more conversations. The apartment was the same size it had always been and somehow felt like it had doubled, all that empty space where his presence used to live, and I stood in the middle of it and felt, for the first time, the full weight of what I had actually done. The months that followed were the most humbling of my life. I was calling Kayla at midnight, falling apart in the same ways over and over, and I could hear it in her voice after a while, that quiet exhaustion that comes when someone loves you, but has also run out of ways to absorb your pain over something you caused. She said it directly one night, the way real friends do when they love you enough to stop protecting you from the truth. She said, "Simone, I love you. But you did this. And I genuinely don't know what you want me to tell you." And I had no answer, because she was right, because what I wanted was someone to give me permission to grieve without guilt, to hold my hand through the loss of a man I had betrayed, and nobody was going to give me that, and they shouldn't have. I drove past the address I had heard mentioned once, just to see if his car was there. I texted him from a number he didn't know at 2 in the morning. I checked his Spotify, the one place he had somehow forgotten to block me, and I watched his listening activity like it was the last living piece of him I was allowed to see. He was playing a lot of Frank Ocean. A lot of slow, melancholy, I am healing without you music. And that hurt more than an argument ever could have. Then his mother called. It was 3 weeks after he left, and when I saw her name on my screen, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment before I answered. She was a woman who had always treated me with warmth, always made me feel like I belonged in her family, and I had looked her son in the eyes and made choices that dishonored all of that. She didn't yell. She didn't say anything cruel. She just spoke in that steady, quiet voice of hers and said, "I raised that boy to love with everything he had, and I raised him to know when it was time to walk away." Both of those things are true. Then she told me she hoped I found peace, and she hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor after that call and cried in a way I hadn't cried since childhood, not pretty or controlled, just completely undone, because that phone call removed the last thing I had been holding on to. I had been telling myself somewhere deep down that Marcus would come back eventually, that the love we had was too large to just end in silence, that a man who saw me the way he did could not simply stop seeing me. His mother's voice, gentle and final, closed that door. I started real therapy in the second month. Not the kind where you vent and feel better temporarily, but the kind where someone sits across from you and refuses to let you stay comfortable in your own story. Dr. Reeves asked me in our first session not what happened, but why. And I had the answers ready, the loneliness, the distance, feeling invisible. She let me finish. Then she asked me one question that I have not stopped thinking about since. She said, "What did you do with those feelings before you acted on them?" And the honest answer was nothing. I said nothing. I told Marcus nothing. I sat inside a resentment I had never even named out loud and let it quietly justify every wrong choice I made. I hadn't been failed by the relationship before I cheated. I had failed the relationship by never giving it the honest conversation it deserved. That was the thing I had to carry, not just the act, but the cowardice underneath it. By month 5, I was sleeping again. I had transferred floors at work, so I wouldn't have to see Darius, who had moved on without a second thought, confirming everything I should have understood from the beginning about what I had actually meant to him. I stopped checking Marcus's Spotify. I stopped driving past addresses. I was doing the work, slowly and unglamorously, the kind of work that doesn't feel like progress until you look back from a distance and realize you've come further than you thought. Month 6, Marcus sent one email. No greeting. No name. Just a short, clean message about lease paperwork that needed to be signed within 10 days. I read it more times than I can count, pressing up against those words looking for something human inside them, some small evidence of feeling, and there was nothing. It was the most precise, stripped-down communication I had ever received from a man who once sent me long messages about ordinary things just because he was thinking about me. I signed the paperwork and returned it the same day, and then I sat in the apartment that used to be ours and I let myself grieve completely for the first time. Not the managed, controlled grieving I had been performing for months, but the real kind. The kind that comes from finally accepting that something is gone and is not coming back. I thought that was the hardest moment. I was wrong. 8 months after he left, I was in Ponce City Market on a Saturday afternoon, not looking for anything, not expecting anything, just existing in the city the way you learn to do again after a loss like this. And I saw him. He was standing near the far end of the market, and he was laughing, genuinely laughing, at something the woman beside him had said, and she was laughing too, leaning into him slightly the way you do when you're comfortable with someone. When their presence is easy and familiar. He looked lighter than I had ever seen him. Not performed happiness, not moving on for show, just actually, quietly, unburdened. Theo was on a leash beside him, older now, walking slower, but still there. Marcus hadn't noticed me. He didn't look over. He just stood there in the middle of a regular Saturday, rebuilt and whole, in a life that had clearly continued and grown and healed in all the ways I had hoped for him and feared for myself. I turned and walked in the other direction before he could see me, and I made it to my car before the tears came, and when they did, they came from a place I didn't have a name for yet. Not jealousy exactly. Not even grief exactly. Something more like the full arrival of a truth I had been intellectually accepting for months, but had never actually felt until that moment. He was okay. He had chosen himself, healed himself, and moved forward into something real. And I was nowhere in that picture. Not even as a shadow. I'm not going to tell you that I drove home and found peace with that. I'm not going to wrap this up neatly and tell you I'm grateful for the lesson and that everything happens for a reason and that I've emerged stronger. Maybe some of that is true in some quiet, long-term way. But what is also true is that I stood in a parking garage and cried over a man I had no right to cry over, because I had been the one to break it, I had been the one who made the choices. And he had simply had the dignity and the love for himself to refuse to stay broken. His silence was never indifference. His silence was self-respect. And watching him laugh like that, easy and real and free, with someone who clearly made him feel the way I was supposed to make him feel, was the most honest consequence I could have ever received. There was no punishment in it. There was just truth. The kind you can't argue with, can't soften, can't talk yourself out of it 2 in the morning. Just the clean, irreversible fact of what I lost and why I lost it, standing there in the middle of an ordinary Saturday, laughing without me. I think about that moment more than I think about anything else. I think about the way he looked, unbothered and present, like a man who had put something down and never once looked back to see if it was still there. I used to think the worst thing someone could do after a betrayal was shout. I understand now that the worst thing they can do is heal. Because healing means it's really over, and over means there is no version of this where you get to fix it, no door left slightly open, no thread left uncut. He is somewhere in this city right now living a full life, and I am somewhere in this city learning what it means to deserve one. That's the part nobody tells you when you make the choices I made. You don't just lose the person. You lose the version of yourself you were when you were loved correctly. And getting that back, if you ever do, is the slowest, loneliest work there is. I'm still doing it. That's all I know how to tell you.